Hello, seventh grade. So in our last segment, we talked about human impact and things like what we do on the ecosystem. Now we're going to talk about how we can do some conservation of the ecosystem. So our objective is to explain how the use, protection, and conservation of natural resources by humans can actually impact the environment from one generation to the next. So our essential question that we're looking at is, what role do humans play in maintaining ecosystems? Again, one, this is a review from a lot of the information that we had in sixth grade that we did. And two, if you want to take notes, you have the doc that you can type directly on, or you can just take them by hand so that you have them for your upcoming test. What is conservation? Well, conservation, again, is the careful use and protection of the Earth's renewable and non-renewable resources. So it's kind of all working together. And we did a big project kind of on sustainability with that happening last year. Scientists, politicians, business people, and everyday citizens around the world are working to conserve and save our natural resources. And as we know, it takes everybody from all points of view to be able to get that done. So what is stewardship? You may remember that key term from last year. Environmental conservation begins with environmental stewardship, which is taking responsibility for the Earth's resources by all that we share. We do this by planning how we're going to manage those resources and fostering sustainability, which is the ability of a population or ecosystem to survive indefinitely or forever. I think that the key thing that we talked about last year in sixth grade was that sustainability is meeting our needs without depleting the resources for future generations to meet their needs. So how can we achieve sustainability? Well, sustainable development are developing ways to meet our needs, again, without depleting supply of natural resources or damaging the environment. Things like recycling paper so we don't have to cut down more trees. If we recycle more, then we don't have to cut down as many trees. In addition, right now, I think that we're doing a good job in terms of not having paper to do all of this stuff on. So reducing, then reusing and recycling. Sustainable development involves careful community planning. So building homes, say for example, closer to schools and businesses so you don't have to drive as far. Careful construction of those buildings. So maybe having some new technology and things that can help us out with that, like solar panels or homes that use less electricity can also help save you money. Better insulation to keep your cool in and the heat in when you need it to be. Improving agricultural lands, like conserving soil. We talked a lot last year about things like erosion of soil and how it's important for us to keep plants embedded in the ground so that we can help against things like flooding and storm surges. Soil conservation. After years of planting crops, fields can lose their nutrients. We talked about crop rotation, for example. So to protect soil, nourish them, with organic matter. Remember, that's things like poop and dead plant clippings or compost. Plants need nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, and water, which you all took a look at with the nitrogen and carbon cycles. Plant cover crops to prevent erosion, and it's usually cheaper to protect soil than to buy new soil every year. So if we're able to rich and re-enrich the nutrients back into the soil, then you have better crops or better growing seasons throughout the coming years. A crop cover is planted to prevent crop erosion so that the crop covers, right? That's why it's called crop cover, and protects the soil. Erosion happens, remember, when the sand and soil is transported away from its original location. So things like wind blowing it away, washing it out to sea, being carried by water. Whenever we have runoff, remember, all of those things happen by taking the soil away, which is erosion. Another example of conservation is protecting endangered species, which is a species whose population is so small that it's in danger of being extinct. Things like rhinos, gorillas, green sea turtles, many other ones, and you guys did some of your projects on some of these endangered species. So how can we protect some of them? Well, you told me before that you can create laws to protect them, making it illegal, for example, to hunt or kill or collect them, restricting the use of chemicals and pollutants that can actually harm them. So not only think about what we're doing to them physically, but also how they're getting their nutrients into their waterways and in their food could also potentially harm them. helping the organisms breed. This has some controversy to it. Many zoos have breeding programs to help increase the number of endangered organisms, but it has to be an accredited zoo for that. We can also think about habitat restoration, which is probably one of the biggest ones. If we improve conditions of damaging habitats to return it to the way it was before it was disturbed, then more organisms will have a better chance of survival in their natural habitat. For some examples, in North Carolina, eastern oysters are an important keystone species, so scientists are trying to increase their population size by restoring the estuaries in which they live. And remember, an estuary is where you have freshwater and saltwater mixing and meeting. Again, a keystone species, which most of you told me about already in your projects, is a species that plays a very important role in the ecosystem, and its loss can actually affect many others in the population of that ecosystem by decreasing them or increasing another population out of control. So which species is more at risk? What do you think? Species one. It's an herbivore that lives in a variety of all habitats all over Africa, like Tanzania, Kenya, and Botswana. Or species two, an herbivore that only lives in one large field in Tanzania. All right, the field in Tanzania gets very hot and there's a drought. The grass stops growing. Which population do you think will survive and why? Pause here to think a minute. All right, so hopefully you were able to write down on your paper on the past one that you would have thought that species one would be able to survive because it has a diversity of places that it lives. So if one area like Tanzania is having a drought, then the other places the organism will be able to thrive and flourish. If Tanzania is having a drought and it's the only place that it lives, it might potentially knock out that organism down to a low level of individuals where they may not be able to survive. And lastly, using our renewable resources. These can help replenish after use and create less pollution. Remember, they're also better for the environment. Things that you did projects on last year in 6th grade were things like solar energy, using sun and solar panels, windmills, using wind to produce energy, geothermal vents, using heat from inside the earth, biofuels, using energy made from plants, and hydroenergy or hydroelectric, which uses water to generate energy. So in summary, at the end of your notes, summarize down there for me in about 3 sentences what you've learned about conservation. Think about why conservation is important. What are some examples of conservation efforts being done by humans?